Right, well, are you ready? Thank you very much for joining us today. The Go Global webinar series continues. We've been doing this for some 3 years now, and today we're excited to present as the subject matter is your website secure? Online security for exporters. So thank you for joining us. We welcome you wherever you may be. To the US, those in the US, a good morning to you 1 week after Thanksgiving. We hope you had a good one, are fully recovered. And good afternoon to those of you across Europe, as winter seems to, I have to say, finally arrived. It is getting colder. And tomorrow is December the 1st. So this year is just rushing by. We want to say good day to you all. Thank you for joining us. And also to the many of you who watch and listen to these webinars on demand. We do record these webinars. They are saved away into our on-demand webinar catalog. And so wherever you are and whenever it is for you, you are welcome. My name is John Worthington. I am CEO here at IBT Online, and I'm your host today. I have the huge pleasure of introducing the Go Global webinar series. As I said, some 3 years of Go Global webinars, all about the international online opportunities in taking your business global. Is your website secure? Online security for exporters. A huge topical subject, never more so than today, and growing in importance all the time. We're passionate about our Go Global webinar series. It's all about knowledge. It's all about understanding. As a company, IBT is very concerned to be at the forefront of knowledge and understanding in these issues that concern us. And keeping up to date with security is a great example. It's very topical. There's a lot of data corruption, a lot of data theft. We hear about this a lot. We know that there's a lot more that we don't hear about. A recent good example is at Uber. It went unreported until there was a change of CEO. So there's lots to be concerned about and lots to learn today. Let's be vigilant and protect our online presence and information, especially in the global context. Now, before we start, I always do a little bit of housekeeping. So those of you who are returnees, welcome back. I'm going to keep this short, but just to say, do know that this webinar is one in our Go Global webinar series, and we're here to help you grow your sales, your brands, and your businesses globally. The Go Global webinar series has a rich catalog, and there is a URL which is www.ibt.onl/resources. And if you go there, you'll find many webinars recorded on subjects related to going online and globally and successfully. Future webinars too. If you go there, you can find what we're planning in the near future. This webinar will be some 45 minutes. A brief introduction by myself, and I'll hand over to our host today, Susanna, and our IBT Online team members. There will be 4 polls, so please be ready. Do be attentive. We look forward to having your opinion on these subjects. There will be time for questions at the end. So please, you see that box there called questions. Click on it, ask whatever you like. We look forward to answering the questions at the end. There will also be a quick survey at the end, so do be aware when we close down the webinar, there are 2 or 3 questions. We would welcome your feedback. And finally, do know that it's a happy Friday tomorrow, and you will get a copy of this recording and slide deck, which will be delivered to you by your email inbox. So now sit back wherever you are in the morning or the afternoon. Enjoy this webinar. Part of the Go Global webinar series is your website secure? And I'm proud to be joined today by our expert guests on the subject. So in the middle, Susanna, the most helpful of the IBT Online team, as Susanna is all about client services, of which she is director. Samantha on the right of your screen, and Jared on the left, 2 of our wonderfully talented online business development managers, and you're going to hear a lot more of them today. So do know a lot of background work has been going into this. Samantha, Susanna, and Jared have been researching and assembling and curating a lot of that useful information all about website security, and specifically online security for exporters as you go and put yourself online in global markets. At IBT Online, we're obviously directly implicated in this subject as we deliver our online global program. all about website localization and those international online marketing programs. So we're there with valuable, up-to-date, practical experience, first-hand case studies, and a unique insight onto the challenges of online security. So a word on Susanna in the middle. Susanna, the lead presenter today. Susanna will be talking all about online security and has a deep understanding. Susanna is very international by definition. Susanna was born in Germany, raised and educated both in Europe and the United States. Susanna has a deep expertise in international online business and has been with IBT Online since 2002, helping us develop our services all around the online global program. Susanna is accompanied today by Samantha on the right. Samantha, one of our online business development managers, lives down in Miami. Samantha is a true Floridian and is an extreme case of digital nativism. She has for many years been both enjoying, for work reasons and pleasure, being online. I first met Samantha many years ago when she had at least 2 mobile devices in her hands and seemed to be online at the same time on both of them. And I'll tell you what, she still does that today. Samantha has a multinational background, speaks a number of languages, and obviously is focused very much as well in South America, and does a lot of social media for some of her favorite nonprofits. Jared, on the left of your screen, online business development manager based in his home city of Richmond, Virginia. Jared is also a digital native, although he is never happier when he's both online and traveling. Jared has traveled widely throughout the world, throughout the US, but he's been around the other side to Australia, back into Europe in Austria and France and Germany, so Israel en route, and Costa Rica. So Jared has covered a large part of the world. And in his travels, Jared has picked up a master's in international business management, focused upon global management issues, including online communications and security. So at IBT Online, Jared helps companies understand the challenges of international business and the solutions that the online world can bring, with, of course, that caveat of security. So 2 words on IBT Online before we kick straight into the security subject. IBT Online is a privately held both US and European company. We're all about international business and online technologies, and we've been in business since 2002. So that's over 15 years of helping our clients online and globally. We're very proud to have served over 400 companies, working with them internationally, and over 1,000 localized websites and online marketing programs. That does enable us to say that we have a certain level of knowledge, understanding, and experience in the world of online security. So with that, I'm going to hand to Susanna and say thank you very much, and I will be with you later for the polls. But Susanna, are you there?
Thank you very much, John. It's a great pleasure to be here today and to talk about online security. This is a very topical issue at the moment, and I think will only become more and more at the forefront of people's minds throughout 2018 and such, and until we really master some of these new paradigms that business has to cope with in this digital age. So what we're going to be talking today, we've really just sort of scope out the landscape in terms of the online world and the threats, the cyber threats that we see online, and then we want to talk about some of the main areas where we're seeing risk and what we're perhaps also companies don't always realize where there are open doors to risk, and we'll take some examples. And then in the third section, very much a practical section as well, we're going to talk about some of the solutions, some of the best practices we have, and seeing and sort of the solutions that the companies that we work for have put in place. So without further ado, we're really going to start off with just talking about sort of the online world to give us some background, some landscape, as it were. And I just wanted to put this here in front of you, just to remind you all how huge the internet is these days, how global a presence, how ubiquitous it is, and also the fact that it hasn't stopped growing. This is one of the things that I find most interesting. We all sometimes talk as though the internet had already arrived, and in fact, it's still very much an ongoing process for these. Now, some of these numbers, 2014 is a long time ago already, but it does show very well some of the big axes for cross-border bandwidth, as well as some of the projected growth rates. And I think this comes from a McKinsey report in 2015, where they were talking about digital flow now having a bigger delta, a bigger potential impact on GDP growth than the traditional growth in goods and services. So here the point is just the internet is ubiquitous, global, and still growing. Just to give you the actual numbers, and these will date from January of this year, from the Hootsuite research that they do. I think there's two things that really interest me on this slide. First of all, is just, again, the size of it. 3.8 billion people actively using the internet, actively meaning, on a very much on a daily basis. Note also the percentage of them on mobile. Out of the 3.8, 3.5 are basically on mobile devices. Now, this comes from January of this year. You can be sure that it's well over 4 billion now on the internet as of the end of this year. And then the second slide I wanted to point out as well, just in terms of the level of social media uptake, and this is now also fusing, the use of the internet is fusing between search and social. We'll get back to this a little bit later, but just one little fact to get you on here what I mean when I say social catches up with search. And Facebook is now the #1 news provider in the world. So that's what we mean when we're talking about social catching up with search. For a lot of countries, when you're going online to look up things, you're going to go and look up social things first through your WhatsApp groups, your Facebook groups, and so on, rather than you're directed to your browser. So just to give you that sort of thing, and then just that sort of landscape, and then talk to you just very briefly, one shot of what we mean by website localization. And again, this becomes important when we talk about website localization on export markets and how you deal with different websites across the world and how to make them secure. Now, we've had a lot of webinars just about website localization where we drill down into it, but I wanted this slide just to highlight the sort of the 10 attributes that we've listed here, which make up for us a localized website. So a localized website is one that's fully embedded, functioning, and looks and feels like a local website. So it's, if a German goes on that website of yours, he thinks this is a German website. I trust these guys. They know this place. It acts and it gets found locally well in Germany. So it's optimized for search engines. It's hosted locally. And one of the main things we say as well is that it has online security and digital compliance, which makes it a global, local website. So that's one of the key attributes, and that's what we're going to drill down and talk about today. As I said before, we have a lot of webinars just about website localization, but today just online security and digital compliance.
Susanna, great point, and therefore we can dive into our first poll. So please, everybody, grab your mice, and I'm going to launch the first poll related to this. So here we go. Here's the subject. It is, do you have localized websites for your export markets? So how thoughtful are you to those local user experience, the feedback that you would want to get back online from your clients and your, shall we say, potential online visitors to give them the local export? Is it in your main export markets, only a few export markets, or thinking about it? So I'll give you some feedback. We have 50% are saying yes in a few export markets, and 50% are saying thinking about it. Well, to you all, I hope that, thank you very much. I'm going to close this poll now. There you go. That's my little closeout sound. And I'm going to therefore say that I hand back to Susanna.
Thank you very much. And a nice even split there. That's interesting. I wanted to put this slide up here as well, sort of just as a diagram of how companies are acting in today's digital world. You know, the point now is very much like a website. It is customer or client centric. So the customer really, your client sits at the center and is able to communicate through social media, through the web, through browsers, with other customers, with partners, with competitors, all sorts of things, and directly with you. So your brand, your reputation, your online presence becomes a very vital part of your sales strategy. It has to be, because this is how people are checking you out. This is how people are evaluating whether they want to do business with you or not. And that's not just B2C that I'm talking about. This is very much a B2B environment as well. So if you want to buy, you know, just think of your own actions. If you're looking to buy something from a new supplier, you will check them out on the web, see what their reviews are like, and maybe even form an impression of them just from their website. Now, this also comes even more to the fore when you're looking at export markets and where you have perhaps you're still building brand recognition, and therefore that whole localization and trust atmosphere, that attribute that you really need for the buying process, becomes so much more important for your export websites. This is also this spider web here of today's paradigm for business, environment for business, is also the reason why cybersecurity and the defense from it is so important. It's now become a much more interconnected world, and therefore you are more vulnerable to cybersecurity, to cyber threat, and need to pay a better attention to it. In the past, the traditional approach to defense and protection was quite different from the digital world of today. And there's a lot of sort of rather academic studies that have been put on this, but just summarizing it in the one slide, I'd say that in the traditional sense, you said, right, I've got an asset. That asset can be my company's warehouses or my buildings, my machines, something like that. I need to protect those things. How I protect them? Well, I estimate their value, and then I put a protection around them. I insure them, or put locks on them, lock and key, or a video surveillance, or whatever it is. And I need some intelligence about that protection as well. And governments can go out and look for intelligence about protection. And governments would also, gather intelligence, spying, about the greater world and threats out there. And then there'd be enforcement, whether that's the policeman, if your building gets broken into and you call up the police and say, hey, someone bust the lock here, or enforcement, even governments saying, okay, some threat has happened, we need to engage our military. Today, it's a very different world. On the digital world, for a company, it's a very, very different side. Responsibility has basically shifted right back onto the company and to the private sector, so that you're responsible for your own web security. And a lot of companies have taken this on board as a passive side and saying, okay, I need to make my website secure. And some of the large web companies, like the browsers and such, are being really pushed into taking a more active role, so that the whole shift has gone from the public sector to very much the private sector. And the private sector is also taking on enforcement activities. So it's not just about the protection side, which has gone to private, but even the enforcement side is now in the private sector. So that Google will take offline websites which are seen to be spam or seem to be poor quality. The big companies, whether it's a Facebook or whatever, is saying, okay, that's a video that I will not allow. That's a posting that is not correct legally. Therefore, I will take it off. So that's, again, the enforcement is very much coming from the private sector. And I think the other major point about this is that it's no longer a country-specific issue. Cybersecurity is global. And a company's website, even your domestic one, can be looked at and hacked on not from your own country. So again, this takes responsibility away from individual governments and onto a global perspective But it does mean that it is very much up to you as a company to defend your business, to make sure that you have the right defense for today's online digital world. And we'll come back about how that is done and what that all means with the rest of this webinar. I wanted to also distinguish right from the start a couple of just sort of setting the scene in terms of what are cyber threats, and I've tried to sort of put it all down on one or two slides, and I think you can really say that you can divide them between external threats and internal threats, and they're quite different. Now, the external ones tend to be malicious. They tend to be with deliberate attacks with a specific aim, and that aim is typically extraction. I want to extract data from your website, whether that's your customer base or your bank account details or whatever. It's usually extraction. But I mean, it can also be, types of other things like, ransomware, like adware, and so on. But the main one would be extraction for probably illegal or at any rate malicious objectives. On the other side, equally bad perhaps, but less morally so, are the internal cyber threats. And these are typically privacy breaches. And they can be malicious, but most often they just happen inadvertently. Someone in the team didn't realize and clicked on the malware that got through, or clicked on the wrong button and sent sensitive data out to someone that shouldn't get it. But so those are the two sort of key areas where we see, in either case, damage is done. But one of the problems with really preparing and evaluating a lot of the cyber threats is that each one is still very new. So we're beginning to get some track record about cyber threats, but they still come at us as very new events. It's a very different event from, I talked about in the past, where you'd have a major risk to non-digital world. Well, that would be, an earthquake or a car crash or events like that. Here, these are either, so that's either sort of, sort of something you cannot prepare for, or it's something where it's a recurrent. Okay, I know what happens in a car crash. I know what to do. Here on cyber threats, the digital world, less track record, and therefore each time seems to be something quite new. There are also three types of cyber threat: cyber crime, direct crime, and that is particularly external, probably definitely malicious, and probably for extraction. Cyber activism can either be external or internal, and that again is usually also malicious, and it's not necessarily about extraction. Excuse me. And then cyber espionage, and again that can be either internal or external, tends to be malicious, but it's not about extraction. In each case of those three types of cyber threat and cyber crime, you need to be able to have the mechanisms in place to protect your company against some of these things. So we want to talk now about sort of what are the main risks. And there's a couple of things I think we many of us know about, sort of spam and adware and things. But I also wanted just to say there's a whole host of risks that perhaps one doesn't always think about, and I wanted to drill down on that. But I want to pull Jared in, if possible, to talk us through some of the big global cyber security issues. Jared, if you're there.
Hey, Susanna, thank you for that. Cybersecurity is one of those buzzwords that politicians, businesses, and techies have used in a broad sense to describe a range of issues surrounding the protection of computer systems and networks. As more and more devices become internet capable, the scope and threat of cybersecurity issues and threats will continue to evolve. So on a global scale, the most common form of cybersecurity threats or attacks typically tend to include big data breaches, physical infrastructure tampering, hacks on IoT or Internet of Things devices, and ransomware. Even though both public and private sector organizations are beginning to see the importance of finally implementing more formal procedures and protocols for handling cyber attacks, the impact of cyber attacks on such organizations continues to increase dramatically year over year. So let's look at how impactful cyber attacks were on a global scale in 2017. As you can see in the table below, the World Economic Forum stated that the cost of damages caused by cyber attacks in 2017 alone has exceeded $3 trillion, and that by 2021 it is expected to double to more than $6 trillion in damages. They also found that in 2017, the total global spending on cybercrime prevention was right around $86.4 billion. However, by 2021, they fully expect this to increase to $1 trillion. Another interesting report by the World Economic Forum is a ranking of countries that are best prepared against cyber attacks. While some of the countries in the top 5 spots may surprise you, some of the other countries may not surprise you. So after looking at cyber attacks and security from a global standpoint, let's take a more nuanced view and look at how impactful cyber attacks were from an individual standpoint, from a business standpoint, or from an organization standpoint. In 2017, the industries that experienced the most cyber attacks were the healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, government, and legal industries. While you may think that big businesses are the prime targets for cyber attacks, in 2016 and 2017, 43% of the cyber attacks targeted small businesses. So of the small businesses that were targeted, 14% of small businesses polled rated their ability to handle cyber security attacks as effective. 60% of the small businesses that experience a cyber attack typically go out of business 6 months after that attack. And on average, for a small business loan, the average cost spent to counteract that cyber attack is $880,000. So that raises the question, why are small businesses being targeted? And there really are 3 main reasons to this. One, smaller companies have a weaker online security. They usually have less security personnel, and they typically don't have the right technology in place to manage the constant onslaught of cyber attacks. The second reason is that more and more business is being done through and managed on cloud services. And while these cloud services are beneficial in how easily they allow the transfer and sharing of information, they typically don't use as strong an encryption technology. And finally, small businesses do have valuable data, and that's what attackers have found. Oftentimes, small businesses supply larger enterprises with either goods or services, and hackers have found this as a bridge to gain access to larger corporations.
Jared, that is some very, very interesting information. Look, thank you very much indeed. As ever, this is a great learning session, which leads us into poll number 2. So please, everybody, here we go again. This is the second poll that I'm launching right now. Come and join us. Tell us, have you or your company ever suffered a cyber attack? What's your view? I mean, how close has it come to you? And I'm going to give you some feedback. It was saying 100% yes, and then it's gone to 50. So at the moment, we're evenly split. That's interesting. So 50%, 67%. It's moving all the time. Right. I'm going to call it a date there with the final poll saying 75% have said yes, 25% have said no. Thank you for that. That information, by the way, of course, is confidential, but very useful as we discuss this online security issue. Thank you for that information. This closes this poll, and thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Jared, very much for that. Samantha, I wondered if you could also now talk a little bit about e-commerce and security issues in e-commerce.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I'm willing to bet that many of you listening participated in Cyber Monday, either by being the buyer or the seller. So which means you're very familiar with e-commerce. And e-commerce security has 4 guiding principles that you see on your screen for safe electronic transactions for everybody involved. And because I know I wouldn't buy from companies that have a sketchy security or reputation of leaking customer information. So successful online businesses depend on the customer's trust that a company has these four security basics in place. The first one is probably the most obvious, which is privacy. When you shop online, you expect that your personal details or account information will not be accessible by anyone except for the seller that you have chosen to share it with. The business is responsible to provide at least a minimum level of encryption, virus protection, and a firewall. So your bank details, your credit card details will remain private and only with the business. The next one is non-repudiation. Repudiation means denial, and a good business depends on both the buyers and the sellers to follow through on their part of the transaction, which was organized within them, and not denying these actions. So the legal principle of non-repudiation adds a second level of security by confirming that the information that was sent between the two parties was received, and that the purchase or email cannot be denied by the person who completed the transaction. So it's kind of just saying that both parties will go through with what you promised. The next one is integrity. So this means that none of the information that you shared online as a customer will be altered in any way by the business. The principle states that a secure transaction includes unchanged data, and that the business is using the information that you gave to them the way that they said that they would use it. And any tampering with the information is breaking confidence between the buyer and the seller, which ruins the integrity of the business. And the last one is authentication. So both the business and the seller have to prove to be real. The buyer has to prove that they are an actual customer. I mean, I know I've clicked that I know I am not a robot box more times than I could count, or put in like a security key. And the same thing with the seller. They have to prove that they are a legitimate business. And like common solutions that you could implement are customer logins and passwords, or additional credit card pins, like the little pin on the back of your credit card. Many businesses are asking for this now because it's information that's not really easily accessible. So going on to the next slide, payment security measures to avoid security threats. We're going to kind of touch upon these, as with the last slide. They're kind of common themes throughout, but this is specific to e-commerce. The first one is the security socket layer. So it's developed by Netscape Communications Corporation. And another way of saying secure socket layer is SSL, which is the way that we'll probably be referring to it later on. And it is the most prevalent security model deployed by e-commerce businesses worldwide to secure the payment channels. SSL implements data encryption, optional client authentication, server authentication, and message integrity for the IP connections. The protocol's design aims to prevent eavesdropping, tampering of information, and forgery while transmitting data over the internet between the two interacting parties. Through SSL, it actually follows all of the security provisions that we've reviewed just a slide earlier: encryption, authentication, non-repudiability, and integrity. So it is very important. The next one is payment card industry compliance, which started in 2006, and it pretty much just secures the payment system. It monitors online transactions and its vulnerabilities, and it helps secure the financial data of their customers, so it minimizes these cyber threats. The next one is tokenization, which replaces sensitive data like credit card numbers with randomly generated string of characters, so it reduces the risk associated with a data breach. So credit cards become unrecognizable to hackers. And the idea is that when a transaction is authorized, the data is sent to a centralized server and then stored securely. Sorry, a lot of security in this webinar. And at the same time, a merchant system receives a unique number. So the token can be used as a substitute for the card's data. So as a customer, you can use the one-click method if you want to repeat a transaction. So it makes the customer experience really easy, and it also protects their data. So it's a win-win. The next one is 3D Secure, and it's pretty much just an extra layer of protection where the customer has to confirm their identity with a password in order to continue with the transaction. Next is, and last, is the anti-fraud tools. With fraud prevention tools, every transaction is scanned and monitored either automatically through a system or manually. So it's easier to prevent and eliminate all suspected fraudulent activities. For example, if you are a seller, if you participate in e-commerce, maybe you received several orders from a single IP address. That's a red flag. Or if a customer's email address is just a string of letters and numbers, obviously that's kind of weird, so that would be flagged as well. So all of these kind of irregular, strange things that happen during a transaction are monitored by these anti-fraud tools. And now I'm going to hand it back to Susanna to talk about mobile apps.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Sumit. That's a fabulous little summary there for E and M commerce. So we really wanted just to highlight a few of the areas that we think sometimes get forgotten about as major doors or major windows for cybersecurity. So e-commerce and M-commerce is clearly one, but people don't always realize that mobile apps are actually also very, very vulnerable areas for hacking and for cyber threats. And I guess it really comes down to JavaScript, which is it's a fantastic language. It's very intuitive. It's easy to use. It's easy to learn. There's a very big community out there. So it's very effective. But at its core, it lends itself to cyber threat because you're basically having to give out code and you're basically having to give out your access when you use it. So, and this is particularly visible in mobile apps. So that's one of the reasons why mobile apps do pose particular risks for this. Now, the risks are obviously for data loss, and that's when you start to have that if a cyber attacker has that window into your corporate and sensitive data, and as we've talked about before, extraction as well. And there's also another little sort of thing that happens with mobile apps, which can be also dangerous or can be used by people for in a malicious way, which is something called location identification. Because apps also very often have a GPS or a location identifier, the cyber security also, or the cyber threat can also be that can locate the actual person, and that can also be seen as potentially a danger. Now, the kind of things that are typically installed on a mobile app by cyber things: adware, ransomware, and spyware. The three main ones that we've talked about. So I just wanted to highlight, the mobile apps. Now, the app world is growing exponentially. So this is something that you really have to be quite careful of, and certainly when developing your own apps, need to be very aware. Now, there is a huge range of tools to guard against this, because this was seen as flagged quite early on as a major issue, particularly to block any kind of side loading, so the information can be extracted via either USB or cloud management things. But the tools now today, particularly things called MDMs and MAM controls, are pretty effective. The ones you'll probably see most often and are most visible to the users are things like entering PIN codes or timeout buttons, which also will just act as a little extra lock. But it can also be that the entire device can have an encryption and a certification in order to block unwanted entry from cyber threats. But as I said, so the apps are a very useful window for hackers to get into software, to get into your business for extraction. But as I said, there are a wide range of tools that you can now use to manage those apps. So then I wanted also now to talk about hosting and where you're hosted and how you're hosted and how that's done. Again, this is an area that a lot of companies don't actually realize is a potential window or door to cyber threat. And there's lots of different types of services offered by big hosting companies today. And I just sort of put up the 4 main types of hosting services that are typically offered. For small and for very small companies, they'll typically go for shared hosting. And I'd like to just say that this is kind of like being a student. You're sharing a house. You're sharing your digs. And so you are on the same place as several other companies in that hosting environment. So whatever they experience, you will experience too. And that is obviously a threat for you in terms of shared hosting. And again, a lot of companies are onto that. A lot of hosting companies can deal with that and do try and put some walls around the different companies. But you have to know that if your hosting company has you in a shared environment, okay, it might be cheap, but there is risk. One further up from that is well, depends which way you go, but further out from that will be a sort of a virtual private server hosting, a VPS hosting. And that's kind of similar to having like your own apartment in an apartment building. So you do have your own space. You are more guarded against contagion from other companies, but you're nonetheless within a block of other companies. And there could be some contagion, there could be some downtime that you suffer because of someone else's cyber issues. Then the next one up from that is dedicated, and this is sort of the best case scenario, and certainly one which larger companies all go for. You have your dedicated space for that hosting company. You have your own walls, your own entry and gateways, and that is by far the ones that most able to be controlled. Cloud hosting is the other one as well. Cloud hosting, it's kind of like having your own apartment in an apartment building. It's kind of like the VPS. You're on it with a lot of other companies. You're sharing a space, but you have your own dedicated area within that, and that can be a very secure area. The advantage of it is that you can increase capacity when it's needed. So I've kind of compared it to like having a club membership. It's like you've got membership of a club. You can use it whenever you want, and if you go away, you don't have to use it for the time that you're not there. So you pay on demand, as it were. So that's the cloud hosting one. The 2 big aspects about location and where you're hosted, especially for your exporters, if you as an exporting company, what's really important is that your hosting company has global reach. If you're going to have a website in, say, Vietnam, the person in Vietnam is going to be impatient and not going to wait around if you're only hosted in, say, the UK. It takes a long time to upload or download if you're not hosted locally. The other point about hosting locally is that you can get, if there are any problems, they're detected earlier and they're resolved quicker too. Just a couple of quick points about being aware of what you need to do to be aware about hosting. It's still your responsibility as a company. So that's the key yet again is that the responsibility is yours. It's not the hosting company's responsibility. Even within a shared server environment, you're responsible for making sure that your website is secure. Now, your hosting company, if they're a good company, will give you guidelines and give you resources to make sure that happens and safeguard if anyone gets any downtime because of cyber threat. But nonetheless, the ultimate responsibility is yours. The two main risks is contagion from someone who is being threatened or is having a problem. That will affect you if you're in any kind of a shared or a VPS, a non-dedicated area. And then the other risk is the host itself. So who is the hosting company? My end conclusion is just do your due diligence. Take hosting seriously. Ask the right questions. We for us, for our clients, where we're putting them and how they're being hosted internationally, we spend a lot of time looking and making sure that the hosting company is secure, is the right one, has global reach, and has the best possible security measures. There are a lot of industry standards as well, which they can either ignore or subscribe to. And we would for our companies, definitely, it's they only use the top hosting companies. It's worth the extra money. This is a major area which is often avoided. So now moving on to sort of the next section, the final section, trying to give you some practical solutions and practical tips about website security for exporters. I just wanted to sort of set the scene. Why is this important? I know security is important because it can be, you can rob someone of your databases, you can do spam and so on. But there's another driver as well, which is basically about your online identity. In other words, your reputation. In other words, your brand. And that becomes increasingly important in a digital environment, which is increasingly aware of the threat of security. So that if you can show the outside world, the digital world, the online world, that you are taking your own security seriously, that gives you the extra trust and legitimacy that you need in the buyer process in order to engage your clients. And that's, I think, the key as well. So that this is not just about making sure that you're protecting your business. It's also driven by sales, driven by your bottom line. You will do better business if you're more secure online. So if and those, again, it's those four main characteristics: legitimacy, security, ownership, and privacy. Samantha alluded to pretty well the same things in the e-commerce slides. It's about the accountability. It's about the transparency. Yes, I am who I say I am. Yes, I have put good encryption on, and I am compliant with the online world. And privacy, who has control over data. So that's some of the things that I think one wants to really aim for that. I'm going to start with just one little mention about digital online compliance. This is something which will gain enormous momentum over the coming months, and I think not just in Europe with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is coming in force in 2018, but across the world. Europe is very much now pushing this to the fore, but all countries are starting to take this much more seriously, even countries which have traditionally been, let's say, at the slacker end of cyber security. So the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, has been over 2 years in the making, in the run-up. The deadline is May 2018. Any company, anyone doing business with a European company has to abide by GDPR. So it's not about, well, I'm not a German company, so I don't need to do this. Or I'm a US company, so I don't. No, if you are, no matter what your nationality, you're a US company based in California, if you are doing business in Europe and have any transaction or any involvement with a European company online, then you have to adhere to the GDPR. And it has a very heavy stick. The stick is basically large fines will be served for this. So this is something definitely to keep on. Again, it's not directly about security, but it is still on the same wavelength. It's about regulation and compliance, and therefore about making sure that you are giving security and trust to people who engage with you.
Susanna, thank you very much for that. Very, very interesting. GDPR, it's good to see that the regulatory environment is catching up with sort of the wild west of the net. Always a bit of a time like that, but they're there. It's time now. It is poll number 3, so please join us, and we'd like your feedback on the subject of are your export websites digitally compliant? So are you paying attention out there to all of your main export markets? Only a few? Is it no or not sure? It is a regulated environment, and increasingly so. And I guess one of the things we just like to flag up is please be aware. And I'd like to give you some feedback. And actually, I am sympathetic with this feedback. It says 100% not sure. I totally understand what you mean when you're saying that. Thank you for that. I'm going to close. That's our third poll closing out. Thank you for that information. 100% not sure.
Wow, that is very telling, in fact, and very honest of you all. Just know that we will be having a webinar coming up just about this subject, because I think that I'm not sure, and what is the compliance is, I think, actually very prevalent. I want to just get back and talk about these certifications and the security certifications that we're now seeing as very much the core of a security strategy for your online presence. Samantha already mentioned secure socket layers, SSL, the now also called transport layer securities, TLSs. These are basically types of certifications that you can get. And what's interesting is that you can get them for all different kinds of things. You can get them for a device. You can get them for the content on a website. You can get them for an app, like a mobile app that we mentioned. You can get them for even a piece of code. Like, for example, if you're coding between supplier and yourself, or between distributors, and for the entire website. I think, though, what's the very much the going trend is that this is now seen as something really important to get for the entire. It's no longer just for one page. It used to be that an SSL or TLS was just for that one page for your where you had a shopping basket. If you had an e-commerce platform, then you would just do the certification for that one page to make sure that one page had a secure encryption. This is definitely seen as no longer good enough, no longer fit for purpose. Now, today's world, one wants really to have the certification for the entire website, and the entire website having the encryption. So let's talk a bit about what we mean by this. To get validation really about these certifications, there are really 3 levels of validations, and these validations are given typically by a third party. You can also self-certify, but it's not recommended. The third party is typically called a certification authority. There are different types of certification authorities, and here I've likened them to companies that you might already know, or certifications that you might already know, like a Veritas, like a Bureau Veritas for Europe, or an ISO. It just says, if I've completed that, then I have done that level, ISO and ISO level. And again, a certification authority for a third party, for a recognized third party, allows you to have validation of the certifications that you want. There are basically 3 levels. At the very bottom is called a domain validation. This is something you can easily do yourself, and it validates that you own the domain. That's all it validates, and it's something you actually want to actively avoid. Actively avoid domain validation. Why? Because hackers use it all the time. It is seen as a red flag by a lot of security people, because you don't need that third-party validation. And in fact, it doesn't actually say that, it says I own that domain or something, but it doesn't actually say anything else about the validation or who the person is. It doesn't actually give you any transparency down. So if you're looking at validation and saying, well, that's a cheap one, I can do that, actually you're doing a negative. So to avoid domain validation. On the first level, though, you have organization validation, and that is a good level for saying that this company exists, this website exists, and we are who we are, who we say we are. We have a certain level of security. It is for a pretty basic validation, and any company who's doing international business, and particularly if you have any kind of e-commerce site, or even with a distributor access areas, you will definitely want to go for the middle one, the extended validation, the EV. EV levels allow the top level of validation. In each case, organization and extended, but especially extended, they have been looked through by an individual, not done automatically. A certified person within the certification authority has gone through page by page, gone through and looked at it, and stamped the approval. So it has the highest possible level of approval on that. And so once you have that, you can then get your SSL and then change your HTTP to HTTPS. Now, all that means an awful lot of letters, and I'm going to try and simplify this as much as possible. If you want more details, we have a lot of blogs. So we have a very recent blog about this as well. Basically, HTTP is, as it says there on the slide, it's basically a protocol which allows communication between websites and between different systems and platforms. But each time you open, each time you go to someone's website, each time you're extracting something, listening to music online, streaming a video, sending over a document, whatever, that if you're just on HTTP, that data there is a window that acts, or that act is a window that can be opened by, or a door that can be opened by hackers and by for cybersecurity as a threat. It is not encrypted data. It might just take a second, but that's all it needs. If you have a certification, then you're allowed to put an S next to the HTTP and put HTTPS, which allows for secure, which means that all of your data flow is encrypted to a high level, and therefore you are automatically a safe site. And this is this encryption throughout the website, encryption not just for one page but throughout, is now becoming a norm. And why should it be used? Well, I've tried to put down the three biggest reasons, the three prime drivers for the security side of why use HTTPS. On the first one, it allows, as I said, this encryption. So any data flow of any type of file at all between you and anybody outside your perimeter is automatically encrypted. And it's quite a high level encryption as well. The second point is this authentication, which is says you are, who you say you are, and the person you're sending it to is who they are, say they are. So there's no ability to hide behind an imposter. There's no ability to be what's called man in the middle cyber threat. And the third point is again about authenticity. The content you're sending is what you say you are sending. So you're not sending, you are not doing malware, ransomware, Trojan, or any other kind of malware. So again, those are the three drivers in terms of security. But I also wanted to highlight three drivers which are just, I mean, they're just important really, and I think that, you know, are very motivating as well. Certainly for our clients as well, another motivation is that using the HTTPS, the better security allows you to manage your online brand. It means that you are a responsible online digital citizen and company. That increases your conversion rates. Certainly if you're doing e-commerce and m-commerce, but even if you're looking to engage potential clients through your website and then reach out to them, engage them in conversation, and for marketing, for lead generation. If you have the S, if you have a secure website, it basically builds trust, and that gets brand credibility, brand recognition. This has also been very much pushed by Google, who now ranks the HTTPS as a major motivator for search engine optimization. So amongst all the attributes within the Google SEO, within the Google algorithms for ranking websites, the S and a secure website and a digital compliance and a digitally secure website now is one of a strong ranker as well. So you will rank better in search engines and the largest browser in the world with Google if you have a secure website. And that is going to be a major driver as well. Now, you've all seen websites that you've clicked on and you've tried to download something and you've suddenly come up with, are you sure this is this is not a secure site? Are you sure you want to download from this? That warning sign is going to become increasingly virulent, increasingly dissuasive. It's kind of like smoking a packet of cigarettes. It's now going to look a lot less appealing to interact with a company that does not do HTTPS. So if you're not already there, get there soon. And John, perhaps we can have our last poll.
Yeah, thank you, Susanna. That was fascinating. And if that isn't a motivator, well, there you go. So fourth and final poll, here we go. I'm launching it. And guess what? It's all about, does your website, are you HTTPS? Are you secure for all of your sites? Perhaps some of them, are you thinking about it or are you not sure? And I'd like to give you some feedback here, which is 50% are thinking about it and 50% are saying we're not sure. Well, it's an even split. There we go. Indeed, these are issues which are totally topical there right now. Therefore, we're talking about them, bringing them to your attention. We thank you for that. I'm closing this poll. There you go. That's it. That is our fourth and final poll closed, and I'll hand it.
Thank you very much, John. We're running a bit behind time. We just want to bring this up as a sort of a bit of a roundup slide to show you the top tips that we can advising for our clients, that we're doing for our clients. We're getting them all onto the HTTPS. We're making sure they're all digitally compliant. We would advise as well, obviously, that you have a backup, but also a recovery procedure just in case. So this is just the 6 steps that we do for all of our clients that we recommend in order to be digitally secure. Choosing the right partners, choosing the right hosting company, making sure you have strong passwords, obviously, making sure you're up to date with software. So these are the 6 steps that we go through and wanted to share with all of you in terms of what we recommend for our clients and what the things that we put in place when we are managing their websites. So a final sort of view from us is, your online persona is an important attribute to your company. It is perhaps the most important sales and marketing tool you have. It is your online brand and your online reputation. You are responsible for it. You need to take responsibility and accountability for the security as well. John, we're running behind time, so I'm not going to say anything more of that, but I just wondered if they have 2 seconds still for any questions, if we've received any questions.
Yeah, indeed, there are a bunch, and so we will be getting back to you, and thank you for that checklist. I just remind you, you will be getting a copy of the slide deck tomorrow, so we'll get that checklist to you. Jared, let's get you back on the stage there. Bella is saying, and I think she works for a company which isn't far from you, so Midcap Company says, we'd like your recommendation on some best practices for small businesses when it comes to cybersecurity. Jared, over to you.
Yeah, first off, that's a really good question. And, unfortunately, there isn't really one answer that remains true for every business, but just some general best practices are, one, if you haven't already begun the process of getting the certificate for your HTTPS website, that's probably a good place to start. Two, make sure you have digital compliance protocols and up-to-date software. And by that, I mean make sure that any tools or platforms that you use in the design, development, and management of your site is kept up to date with the most current security patches. I think, we've already touched on this briefly, but, use strong passwords. And I know you hear that all the time, but make sure you require your employees to use strong passwords on all of their devices. Another best practice is to make sure you have a backup and recovery procedure. And hopefully this doesn't happen to any of y'all, but if your website were to fall victim or prey to malware, it's very vital that you have a current backup that you can revert to. And finally, choose the right partners. If you don't manage your website yourself, make sure that the partners you have chosen to partner with understand the importance of taking the appropriate security steps, and that they have the understanding to manage both the domestic and international websites that you do have.
Jared, that was great. Very succinct and very clear. Really good points. Thank you there. I'm going to, Samantha, over to you. Jim says he's got a bunch of distributors in South America, and they're running their online marketing. How can he check if they're secure? Well, Samantha, you must be the go-to person. What's the answer?
Yeah, okay, so kind of thinking about this, you can divide it into two parts. One, I suggest that you don't let them do your online marketing. The least that you could do is own your domain names in the markets that you're trying to go into, because we recommend it as best practice, because then you are in control of your brand. If you let your distributors relay the messages of your brands, it's kind of risky, and you're letting them take reign of how your target markets are gonna take it in. So that's first thing. Don't let them do your online marketing, if possible. And second, if you do let them do your online marketing and they do have some sort of control of a website in your target markets, the first thing you could do is check if it's HTTPS. We've harped on it a bunch on this webinar, but that's probably the most obvious and like the first step that you could do. But even if they do have an HTTPS, it's still kind of risky, because there are the other best practices that Jared mentioned that aren't as obvious, that they might not be participating in or implementing. So I suggest that you own your international online marketing so that you can own your brand, your reputation, and your security. You don't want to put that into somebody else's hands. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. And good luck in South America.
And it's a pretty radical solution there. I'm glad you have some thoughts on that one, and they're very clear, Samantha. Thank you for that. Susanna, then here, Raymond says he's got websites that are more or less secure in the world. Is security the same everywhere in the world? I mean, that's a great question.
That is a great question, and the simple answer is no. Security varies enormously, and from digital compliance to the infrastructure itself, and the level of broadband, the level of hacking, and so on, and what's permitted by authorities and what's not. There's absolutely huge variation, and certainly this is one of the not the challenges, but it's something that we think about a lot when our clients go from one market to the next. They'll go from places which have a very high security environment and a lot of regulation to places perhaps that are a little bit further, on the other side of the curve. But what you can do, and certainly is what we do for our clients, is really look at best practice throughout and make sure that you've got the best, that your company is doing best practice, no matter what market you're in. So no matter what market you're in, you need to make sure that your hoster is correct, that your website is secure, that you have the right protection and encryption around your website, and that you've chosen the right partners that also have a high level of security, or if not, or if you're unsure about them, that you are ring fencing that. So as long as you, as the company, or what we do for our clients is that we make sure that they have the best practice online and digital practices, and that enables them to be safe no matter where they are in the world, relatively speaking, and not be a victim of poor practice in a particular country or whatever. So the key is really making sure that you are responsible for it and enforcing that rather than relying on the local environment.
Okay, Susanna, thank you for that. And I think we're going to have to close real soon, but there's one from Henri here. So I said a French participant in today's webinar. Let's go to Jared, which is, how long does it take to get the SSL certification? He's saying they're thinking about it. How long does it take, Jared?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll kind of preface it by saying that there's really different levels of SSL certification, but typically for the companies that we manage, really the entire process can be done within a week or two. Typically we have to apply for it and get the certification, and then after that there's a few things that need to be tweaked on the website to kind of finalize the process. So yeah, to answer your question, like I said, pretty quick process. Usually within a week or two we can get it done.
Right. Well, look, thank you for that. I think with that, I'm looking at the clock and realizing how far we've overshot, in which case I do feel that it is time now to close and say thank you very much to everybody. We hope that you enjoyed the webinar. We hope that you found all of that information useful, with lots of takeaways to help you get and ensure that your website is secure and that you are secure online and globally. There will be the quick survey that comes through, and you will get a recording of this on your desk through your email box tomorrow. I want to thank you. I want to thank Susanna, Samantha, and Jared with a little bit of applause here. Yes, that's to say thank you very much indeed for really a lot of great information. Very, very useful. And with that, we're going to thank everybody for attending. Thank you for joining us today, and we wish you a great and secure online future. Thank you very much.